I never planned to stay at my best friend's house. A canceled trip, one storm, one unexpected night, and one man I was never supposed to notice, my best friend's father. I thought it would be over by morning. I had no idea that one rainy night would change both of our lives forever. I used to think love was something people invented because they were afraid of being alone. At 19, I had everything figured out, or at least I thought I did. Relationships were messy. Feelings complicated everything. Flirting was fun because it ended before anyone got hurt. I never stayed long enough for anyone to expect forever, and honestly, that worked just fine for me. Then one rainy Friday changed everything. My best friend, Mason, and I had been planning a weekend hiking trip for nearly a month. We had packed our bags, booked a cabin in the mountains, and escaped our college assignments in our minds long before we ever left town. But nature had other plans. By late afternoon, the sky had turned almost black. Rain slammed against my windshield so hard I could barely see the road ahead. My phone buzzed with a weather alert warning everyone to stay off the highways because flash flooding had already started outside the city. A few seconds later, Mason called. "Dude, don't even try driving up there," he said before I could answer. "The highway's closed." I sighed, pulling into an empty gas station to wait out the storm. "So, that's it. Looks like it." Months of planning disappeared in a single sentence. For a minute, neither of us spoke. All I could hear was the heavy rain pounding against my car roof. Then Mason laughed. "You've already driven halfway across town. Just come to my house. Mom's visiting my grandma for the weekend, so we've got the place mostly to ourselves." I glanced through the blurry windshield. Guess I don't have a better offer. 20 minutes later, I pulled into his driveway, completely soaked after running from my car to the front porch. Mason opened the door before I even knocked. "You look like you lost a fight with the weather." It wasn't even close. We both laughed as he handed me a towel. His house felt strangely peaceful. Warm lights filled the living room while rain tapped softly against the windows. It smelled like fresh coffee and something cooking in the kitchen. I expected the house to be empty. Instead, someone stepped into the hallway. "You must be Ryan." I looked up. Mason's father, Daniel Carter. He looked nothing like I had imagined. He wasn't loud or intimidating like some parents. He simply stood there with calm gray eyes, wearing a dark sweater with the sleeves rolled up as if he'd been making dinner. His expression carried a quiet kindness that made the room feel somehow smaller and warmer at the same time. "It's nice to finally meet you," he said with a gentle smile. His voice was soft, comforting, almost impossible not to notice. "You too, sir." "No need for sir," he replied. "Daniel is fine." Mason laughed from behind me. "Good luck getting him to call you that." Dinner turned out far better than I expected. The three of us sat around the table talking about college, movies, terrible professors, and Mason's embarrassing childhood stories. Daniel mostly listened, smiling whenever Mason exaggerated something for dramatic effect. Every now and then, I'd catch Daniel watching us with a quiet expression that didn't quite match the conversation. It wasn't sadness exactly, more like loneliness, the kind that settles into someone's life so slowly they stop noticing it's there. After dinner, Mason disappeared upstairs to answer a video call from his girlfriend, leaving me alone in the kitchen to help clean up. "You don't have to do that," Daniel said as I picked up a stack of plates. "My parents raised me better than that." He chuckled. "I can see that." For the next 15 minutes, we worked side by side in comfortable silence. No cuernis. No pressure to fill every quiet moment. Just the sound of rain outside and warm water running over dishes. "You and Mason have been friends a long time," he finally said. "Since freshman year. He talks about you a lot. I hope that's a good thing." His smile widened. "It is." Our eyes met for only a second, long enough for something unfamiliar to settle quietly between us. Not attraction. Not yet. Just curiosity. Later that night, lying awake in the guest room while the storm raged outside, I found myself thinking less about the canceled trip and more about the quiet man downstairs whose smile somehow lingered in my mind far longer than it should have. I told myself it was nothing. I had no idea that one unexpected rainy night had already begun changing both of our lives forever. After that rainy weekend, I expected life to go back to normal. Classes, assignments, late-night gaming sessions with Mason, the usual routine. Instead, I found myself looking for excuses to visit his house. I blamed it on convenience. Mason lived closer to campus than I did, and his place was quieter than the crowded apartment I shared with 2 roommates. It made perfect sense to study there. At least that's what I kept telling myself. One Tuesday afternoon, I showed up carrying 2 coffees. Mason opened the front door with a guilty grin. "Don't hate me. What did you do?" I completely forgot. I promised Emma I'd help her move today. I stared at him. "So you invited me over, then made other plans?" "I forgot," he laughed. "Stay anyway. Dad's home. I'll only be gone a couple of hours." Before I could protest, he grabbed his car keys and disappeared. "You're the worst friend ever," I shouted after him. "I know." His voice faded as the front door closed. Great. Now I was stuck spending the afternoon alone with his father. Daniel looked up from the living room where he was reading a book. "Looks like you've been abandoned." I laughed. "Apparently. Coffee? I actually brought some." He smiled. "Then you've already earned your place here." We sat on opposite ends of the couch, sipping coffee while rain clouds drifted lazily across the afternoon sky outside. Unlike most adults, Daniel never treated me like a kid. He asked about my photography hobby. He listened when I talked about college. He even admitted he never really understood social media, which somehow led to me showing him ridiculous videos online until both of us were laughing harder than either of us expected. "I can't believe millions of people watch this," he said, shaking his head. "I can't believe you actually laughed." "I did not." "You absolutely did." His smile gave him away. For someone so quiet, he had an unexpectedly warm laugh. It was genuine, comfortable, the kind that made everyone around him relax. Over the next few weeks, it happened again and again. Sometimes Mason was home. Sometimes he wasn't. Yet somehow I kept finding myself talking with Daniel. One afternoon, I noticed him struggling to carry several heavy boxes into the garage. "Need a hand?" "I've got it." "You clearly don't." Before he could argue, I grabbed one of the boxes. For the next hour, we sorted old camping gear, family photo albums, and dusty Christmas decorations. I picked up a framed picture that showed a younger Mason standing between his parents. Daniel noticed my expression. "That was before." He paused. "My wife passed away 6 years ago." The smile on his face didn't disappear. It simply became quieter. "I'm sorry," I said softly. He nodded. So was I. There was no bitterness in his voice, just acceptance. As if grief had become something he carried every day without expecting anyone else to notice. "I kept busy after that," he continued. "Work, raising Mason, bills, responsibilities. And now," he looked around the garage before answering. "Now Mason's almost finished college." His smile returned. "I suppose I forgot to figure out who I was after being a husband and a father." His words stayed with me long after we finished unpacking the boxes. I had never thought about loneliness like that, not as being alone, but as forgetting yourself while taking care of everyone else. A few days later, I surprised him by bringing ingredients for homemade tacos after class. "You cook too?" Daniel asked. "I survive." He laughed. "That's not the same thing." Working together in the kitchen felt strangely natural. He chopped vegetables while I burned the first batch of tortillas. "You weren't kidding," he teased. "I said I survive. I never claimed I was talented." By the time dinner was ready, we had flour on our clothes, music playing softly from the kitchen speaker, and somehow managed to turn cooking into one long conversation. He told me stories about traveling when he was younger. I told him about my dream of becoming a travel photographer. "You'll get there," he said without hesitation. "You really think so?" "I've met enough people to recognize determination." His confidence caught me off guard. No one had ever believed in my dream so naturally. For a moment, Neither of us spoke. The kitchen suddenly felt very quiet. As I reached for 2 plates, my hand brushed against his. Neither of us pulled away immediately. It lasted only a heartbeat, a completely innocent touch. Yet something shifted. Neither of us acknowledged it. We simply finished setting the table as though nothing had happened. But later that night, driving home beneath a sky finally free of rain, I couldn't stop replaying that tiny moment in my mind. It wasn't just that Daniel had become someone I enjoyed talking to. Somewhere between shared coffees, old memories, laughter, and quiet evenings, my curiosity about my best friend's father had quietly become something far more dangerous. Something changed after that night in the kitchen. Neither of us mentioned the brief touch of our hands, yet it lingered between us every time we were in the same room. Daniel became careful, not cold, just careful. If I arrived at Mason's house, he always greeted me with the same gentle smile, but our conversations became shorter. He suddenly found reasons to stay busy, working in the garden, fixing things around the house, or disappearing into his home office. At first, I wondered if I had imagined everything. Maybe that moment in the kitchen had meant nothing to him. Maybe I was reading too much into ordinary kindness. One Saturday afternoon, Mason invited me over to watch a football game. When I arrived, Daniel was outside repairing the old wooden fence. "Need help?" I asked. He glanced up, then quickly looked back at the loose board. "I'll manage. You've been saying that a lot lately." For a second, he froze. Then he forced a smile. "I don't want to keep stealing your weekends." "You aren't." Silence settled between us. It felt heavier than before. Eventually, I grabbed a hammer anyway and started working beside him. For almost an hour, we barely spoke. The quiet that had once felt comfortable now felt painfully awkward. When the last board was finally secured, Daniel wiped the sweat from his forehead. "Thank you. You know," I said carefully, "if I did something wrong, you can tell me." His shoulders stiffened. "You didn't. Then why are you avoiding me?" He opened his mouth, but no words came. A moment later, Mason burst through the front door. "There you guys are. Come inside before the burgers get cold." The conversation ended before it had even begun. But the question stayed with both of us. Over the next 2 weeks, Daniel became even more distant. Ironically, that only made me think about him more. I caught myself checking to see if his car was in the driveway before I knocked. I noticed when he looked tired. I remembered the way he took his coffee without sugar. Little things. Far too many little things. One evening, I stopped by unexpectedly to return one of Mason's textbooks. The front door was unlocked. Voices drifted from the kitchen. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I simply heard laughter. When I stepped inside, I saw Daniel talking with a man about his age. They were making dinner together, joking as they chopped vegetables. The stranger noticed me first. "You must be Ryan." Daniel looked surprised. "Oh, Ryan, this is Eric. We worked together years ago." Eric smiled warmly and extended his hand. "I've heard a lot about you." Something inside me tightened. Why had Daniel talked about me? More importantly, why did I suddenly dislike this complete stranger? The feeling made no sense. Eric stayed for dinner. The entire evening, I watched him make Daniel laugh in ways I hadn't seen for weeks. Daniel looked relaxed again. Happy. It should have made me smile. Instead, it left an uncomfortable ache in my chest. When I got home that night, I couldn't explain why I felt disappointed. Daniel wasn't mine. He had every right to spend time with whoever he wanted. So why did it bother me? A few days later, the answer arrived whether I wanted it or not. Another storm rolled across the city. Classes ended early, and Mason texted both of us, saying he'd be late because his car had broken down across town. Without thinking, I drove to his house anyway to wait. Daniel opened the door, surprised to see me standing there soaked once again. "You always seem to arrive with the rain," he said softly. "That I guess I do." He handed me a towel, just like the first night we had met. For a moment, neither of us moved. The sound of rain filled the silence. Finally, Daniel looked away. "This has to stop." "What does?" "This." He gestured helplessly between us. I look forward to seeing you more than I should. My heart pounded. I thought I was the only one. You shouldn't be thinking about me this way. I've tried not to. So have I. His voice cracked with quiet honesty. You deserve someone your own age, Ryan. I didn't choose this. Neither did I. Another clap of thunder echoed outside. Our eyes met. Every reason we had to walk away suddenly felt smaller than the feelings neither of us could deny. Without thinking, I stepped closer. Daniel didn't move. Neither of us spoke. The space between us disappeared until we were standing only inches apart, both breathing a little too fast. For one impossible moment, it felt like the rest of the world had vanished. Then the front door opened. Dad! Mason's voice echoed through the hallway. Daniel and I stepped apart so quickly it was almost painful. Mason looked from me to his father, then back again. His smile slowly disappeared. What is going on here? No one answered. And for the first time since that rainy night had brought me into this house, I realized everything we had been trying so hard to avoid was about to come crashing down. The silence after Mason's question felt louder than the storm outside. His eyes moved between Daniel and me, searching for an explanation that neither of us could give. Dad? He repeated, his voice tighter this time. Ryan, what's going on? Daniel took a slow breath. Son. No. Mason shook his head. Don't call me son like everything's normal. I swallowed hard, trying to find the right words. It isn't what you think. Mason let out a bitter laugh. Really? Because it looked like I walked in on something neither of you wanted me to see. Daniel stepped forward. Nothing happened. But you wanted it to. The sentence hit harder than either of us expected. Daniel lowered his eyes. That silence was all the answer Mason needed. You've got to be kidding me. His voice cracked with disbelief. My best friend. He looked at me. And my dad. I never planned for this, I said quietly. You weren't supposed to plan it. I know. You could have walked away. So could he. The room became painfully quiet. Mason looked at Daniel, waiting for him to deny everything. Instead, Daniel spoke with heartbreaking honesty. I tried. Mason's face fell. You actually have feelings for him? Daniel closed his eyes for a moment before nodding. Ido. The words seemed to steal the air from the room. For several seconds, nobody moved. Finally, Mason pointed toward the front door. I think you should leave. I looked at him. Mason, please. His voice wasn't angry anymore. It was hurt. I can't look at either of you right now. Without another word, I picked up my jacket and walked into the rain. The drive home felt endless. Water blurred the windshield, but it wasn't the rain making it difficult to see. I had just lost my best friend. The next morning, my phone remained silent. No messages. No missed calls. I texted Mason 3 times. Nothing. I thought about calling Daniel. I didn't. If Mason was hurting because of me, the least I could do was give them both space. Days turned into weeks. Campus suddenly felt emptier. I still caught myself looking for Mason before class, only to remember he had started avoiding every place we used to meet. Friends asked why we weren't hanging out anymore. We both gave different excuses. Neither of us told the truth. One afternoon, I saw Mason across the student parking lot. For a second, I thought he might finally talk to me. Instead, he got into his car and drove away without even looking in my direction. That hurt more than I expected. Meanwhile, Daniel buried himself in work. He stopped answering my messages after sending only one final text. I'm sorry. This is hurting everyone. We need to let each other go. I read those words dozens of times. Every version ended the same way, with goodbye. Weeks became almost 2 months. Autumn quietly replaced summer. The colorful trees around campus reminded me that everything changes whether we're ready or not. One evening, I found myself driving past Mason's neighborhood without meaning to. The lights were on inside the house. Daniel's truck sat in the driveway. I almost pulled over. Instead, I kept driving. Some doors couldn't simply be reopened. At least that's what I tried to believe. Across town, Daniel wasn't doing any better. His evenings had become painfully quiet again. The house that once felt peaceful now echoed with loneliness. He often found himself setting 2 coffee mugs on the kitchen counter before realizing there was no one coming over anymore. He stopped halfway through movies because they reminded him of our conversations. He avoided the garage because that was where we'd laughed over old family photographs. Even making tacos became impossible. Every corner of the house carried a memory of someone he had convinced himself he needed to forget. One Sunday morning, Mason finally walked into the kitchen after spending weeks barely speaking to his father. Daniel looked exhausted. Dark circles rested beneath his eyes. His coffee had gone cold. "You haven't been sleeping," Mason said quietly. Daniel offered a weak smile. "I'm fine." "No, you're not." Another silence followed. Then Mason asked the question neither of them had dared to say aloud. "Are you miserable because Ryan isn't here?" Daniel stared into his untouched coffee. For a long moment he said nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I've spent 6 years convincing myself I didn't need anyone." He swallowed hard. "Then one unexpected person walked into my life and reminded me what it felt like to be happy. Again." A tear slipped down before he could stop it. "I never wanted to hurt you." Mason watched his father carefully. For the first time since everything had fallen apart, he wasn't looking at him with anger. He was looking at him with understanding. Because this wasn't a man chasing excitement. It was a lonely man grieving the loss of a connection that had brought him back to life. And somewhere across town, I was lying awake, staring at my bedroom ceiling, wondering if loving someone was worth losing everything else. Neither of us knew it yet. But the hardest part of our story wasn't the heartbreak. It was deciding whether happiness was something we still had the courage to fight for. A week passed after Mason's conversation with his father. Neither Daniel nor I knew it had happened. I was sitting alone in the campus library, pretending to study while reading the same page for nearly 20 minutes, when someone pulled out the chair across from me. I looked up. "Mason." For a moment, neither of us spoke. "I've been a terrible friend," he finally said. I opened my mouth, but he raised a hand. "Let me finish." His eyes looked tired, as if he hadn't been sleeping much either. "When I first found out, I was angry. I know. I thought both of you had betrayed me." His voice softened. "But then I started paying attention." "To what?" "To my dad." He looked down at his hands. "I've never seen him like this." I stayed silent. After Mom died, he stopped living for himself. Everything became about work and raising me. I guess I got so used to seeing him alone that I forgot loneliness isn't the same as happiness. A lump formed in my throat. Mason smiled sadly. "When you started coming over," he laughed again. He let out a quiet breath. I haven't heard him laugh like that in years. I couldn't find the words. "I still think the situation is complicated," he admitted. "It's going to take me time to fully get used to it." "I understand. But I also know something now." He looked directly at me. "You didn't fall for each other to hurt me." I slowly shook my head. "Never." "I believe you." Relief washed over me so suddenly I almost forgot how to breathe. Mason reached into his backpack and slid a folded piece of paper across the table. "My dad wrote this." I unfolded it with trembling hands. "Ryan, I meant every word when I said we needed to let each other go. Not because I stopped caring. Because I cared too much. I convinced myself losing you would protect everyone else. Instead, I only succeeded in hurting the 3 people I love most. If you have already moved on, I'll understand. But if there's even a small part of you that still wants to see me, I'll be at the Lakeside Park this Saturday at 4. No expectations. Just hope. Daniel." By the time I finished reading, my eyes had filled with tears. "I think," Mason said with a small smile, "it's time both of you stopped pretending." Saturday arrived with clear blue skies, the first perfect weather in weeks. The same city that had introduced us through a storm now welcomed us with sunshine. When I reached the Lakeside Park, Daniel was already there, standing near the water with his hands in his pockets. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he turned. The moment our eyes met, every lonely week disappeared. "You came," he whispered. I couldn't stay away. He walked toward me slowly. "I almost didn't write the letter." "I'm glad you did." Daniel smiled, though emotion shimmered in his eyes. "I spent so much of my life believing happiness was something that happened to other people." He paused. "Then you walked into my kitchen carrying coffee, and somehow changed everything." I laughed through my tears. "You changed me too." "I was afraid." "So was I." "I still am." I nodded. "But maybe courage isn't about not being afraid. Maybe it's about choosing someone anyway." His eyes glistened. "I've spent years living for everyone else." He took another step closer. "For my wife. For my son. For my responsibilities." His voice grew steadier. "I'll never regret any of that." But somewhere along the way, I forgot I was allowed to be happy too. I reached for his hand. This time, neither of us hesitated. Our fingers intertwined naturally, as though they had always belonged there. "I don't know what people will say," I admitted. "Neither do I. I don't know what tomorrow looks like." Daniel smiled. "I don't either. But I know one thing." "What's that?" "I don't want to spend another day wondering what might have been." I felt my heart finally settle. "So, what happens now?" "Now?" He laughed softly. "We take things one day at a time. And if people judge us, we'll face it together." His answer was so simple, so honest. I leaned forward, giving him every chance to step away. He didn't. Instead, he gently closed the remaining distance between us. Our first kiss was soft, unhurried, and filled with every conversation we had never been brave enough to have. When we finally pulled apart, we both laughed, overwhelmed by the relief of no longer hiding. A familiar voice called from behind us. I was wondering how long that would take. We turned to see Mason standing a few yards away, shaking his head with an amused smile. "I figured you two might need a witness." Daniel looked embarrassed.
I'm sorry.
Mason walked over and hugged his father. "You don't have to apologize for being happy." Then he turned to me. "You still owe me for disappearing with my favorite hoodie." I laughed. "I knew you'd bring that up." The tension that had divided us for months finally disappeared. As the three of us walked along the lake together, I realized something I had never believed when this story began. Love wasn't something people invented because they were afraid of being alone. Sometimes love arrived quietly, on an ordinary rainy night, when life had completely different plans. And if you were lucky enough to find it, even in the most unexpected place, it was worth having the courage to choose it. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more emotional gay romance stories with happy endings, unforgettable characters, and unexpected twists every week. Tell me in the comments. If you were Mason, would you have accepted Ryan and Daniel's relationship, or would you have walked away? I read your comments, and your ideas often inspire future stories. Until next time. Remember, sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the plans that never happened.